Hey everyone, welcome back to the Earthshot podcast. Today I'm talking with Diego Justiniano, who's the CEO of Exomad Green. And Exomad Green is one of I think the largest biochar carbon removal supplier in the world now, and is really a leading organization in Latin American and Bolivian carbon scenes. So thanks for being on. This is really exciting.
Thank you, Troy. It's a pleasure being with you guys from Earthshot today.
So maybe just to kick us off, if you want to just provide a little background, like how did you get into this? You know, being the largest biochar supplier in the world, I can imagine you have an interesting background that leads you to this point. You want to just share a few tidbits from how you found yourself in this spot?
Sure. So this journey actually started over 14 years ago with Exomad. So Exomad is the largest producer of sustainable forestry uh, products in Bolivia. We have several divisions that range all the way from near flooring and different products within the sustainable forestry area. And throughout this, got tremendous residues. So, just for the fact of transforming what's a cylinder uh, shape type of, which is a tree basically, kind of rectangular pieces like lumber, which is in the or raw material to start producing all the finished products that we do. You generate tremendous amounts of residue, all the bark, all the sapwood, all the sawdust from each cat generates over 50 to 60% of the actual get transformed into waste. And in the tropics, like Bolivia, Brazil, basically all throughout the global south, there's no need for heating or for a generation of a heat basically throughout the winter. So basically, what do they do with this excess waste of a sustainable forestry? They used to burn it. So that caused, a lot of issues internally for us because we didn't see, that this was a proper way of handling. And throughout a lot of research in the years back in 2021 after the pandemic, we came up with the concept of biochar. It was fairly new in terms of trying to apply this to a model with carbon credits. But luckily, we had a lot of support from Pure.Earth, and at that point, we decided to start this journey basically, and started the first facility in 2022. And like we always do at Exomad, we don't things, we don't like to test the waters. If we do something, we just jump into it. And basically, the things made sense, and we started with it was at that time called the largest biochar facility in the world. We took over a year to build it. Adjusting the machinery was a very a new concept, but luckily we had a lot of industrial expertise, a lot of engineers, a lot of very good people within the Exomad team that made this journey a lot of shorter than what it would be. And in March 2023, we started producing biochar. We got certified by June of that year, and we started basically to sell our credits on the market by August of 2023, which is when we started our journey officially as Exomad Green.
Very cool. Just for people, I mean, I feel like everyone knows what biochar is. You burn some wood, slight incomplete combustion, so the carbon is left over. But do you want to share a bit more about like what the actual process is? Because there's actually quite a lot of ways of generating biochar.
Yeah. So actually, biochar, first of all, just as a concept, is a unstable form of carbon that captures the CO2 and traps it in this stable type of charcoal, basically permanently from hundreds to thousands of years. And once you apply that charcoal or that stable type of charcoal on what's called a sink site, which in our case is agriculture, you can use it in concrete, you can use it in different things, then you can say that it will be safely stored for hundreds to thousands of years, which is what actually needs to happen for the generation of the credit. So going back onto how do you generate the biochar? Biochar can be generated by processing what's called in a pyrolysis, which is heating at high temperatures in an absence of oxygen. Uh, any type of organic material, it doesn't have to be wood, it can be anything from manure to bagasos, to any type of organic residue. In our case, due to the nature of our business, it is all the leftover residue from the sustainable forestry sector, but it can be basically anything. So once you go through that industrial process, you generate basically biochar, which is a product that how we capture the CO2 and store it permanently. But you also generate different type of products, like for example, syngas, which is called a synthesis gas, highly with a lot of content in methane, and that fuels the whole operation. So we have basically, or we generate in the process itself our own uh, heating, basically for continuing to continue produce the biochar, the heating for different things. And right now we're implementing also a generation of electricity with all the excess heat as well. So that's in a nutshell, how biochar is.
And is this maybe just to clarify for folks listening, you know, some biochar operations are you dig a hole in the ground, you burn wood, and you cover it up with soil. It sounds like what you're doing is different and a bit more high tech. Do you want to just describe the process of pyrolysis? Like, how big is this equipment? How many tons per hour? Like, what is the, just a little bit more detail to give a sense of scale and what the process is.
So as for biochar production, I would separate this to, for the folks to understand. Uh, there's artisanal type of biochar where you, as just said, you can dig a hole in the ground, put the biomass in there, core it and produce the biochar, just like producing charcoal. That's very low tech to no tech, and it cannot be done at the big scales. And then we also have industrial type of operations like ours, which is very, very big. For instance, our Concepcion facility right now, we have 7 lines of production. We produce an average of anywhere from 1 to 1.5 tons per line per hour. So we're talking about 10 tons per hour of biochar, 240 tons per day, basically. It's a lot. Just to put it on a scale, a sense of the scale, that would mean like at least 20, big trucks per day of production. And in terms of machinery, it's highly technological. We use PLCs. We use a lot of automation. I don't know, just in perspective, our Concepcion facility, it's around 15,000 square meters of covered area only for the machinery of production. We employ in Concepcion roughly around 200 and something people. The workforce basically for the facility. We work 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. So it's day and night operation. And because once you start the process of pyrolysis, you basically cannot stop, unless you do maintenance. So yeah, it's very big.
Yeah. I think it seems like a really elegant solution. Hey, you have a bunch of a big waste stream. 50+% of the wood that you're getting is lost to waste, and you're converting into something that you actually get paid for, and is good for the soil and water retention and all of that. Why isn't everyone doing this? I mean, it seems sort of obvious, but also the way what you described is sort of like maybe there's some technological barriers, maybe there's some market barriers. I'm just curious, like, why isn't everyone doing this? And or are there blockage points in the market or, in the actual implementation?
I think that that would be like a multiple part question, where we can go over certain points. First of all, why isn't everyone doing it? Because it's still a fairly new concept. It's not something that biochar has been around for thousands of years. It was, as many people know, we discovered this from the ancient cultures of the Amazon, where we found in these Amazonian soils a very dark type of soil, which they call it terra preta, which was substantially better for agricultural than regular soil over there. And with the scientific analysis, we discovered that it was because of biochar. However, why is not everyone doing it? First of all, the CDR market, or the technology-based CDR market, is fairly new. And biochar, although it has been here for a long time, it's not sustainable just for the concept of being biochar, where it would be to actually sell the biochar. It's not that known on the market yet, although it has tremendous benefits in agriculture. But due to that lack of economics behind it, it didn't make sense until the technology the tech-based CDR market started to happen. The Puro methodology, which was a pioneer, got developed, and actually, the market started to shift to a more dynamic type of market. The market is still fairly new. It's still small in terms of a number of transactions that are happening in comparison to the nature-based market on the reductions. But yes, so in terms of then going towards the other part, which is what we call a three part model for this to be actually successful, I think that it's not easy to find where you can fit those three. What are those three-part model? First, you need to have a concentrated amount of biomass, which is the key part of the operation, because if your biomass is dispersed and you have to transport it for hundreds of kilometers, then you're going to be causing a lot of emissions, which is not going to make sense at the end of the day, because everything gets counted or factored into your life cycle assessment to prove basically what's your net amount of CO2 that you're removing for each ton of biochar that you're producing. So basically, in our case, for example, we have everything within a 10 to 15 kilometer radius, which is very, very small or very short range. Secondly, you need to have industrial capacity where you're going to be building such facility. And not only industrial capacity in terms of electricity, in terms of roads to get there, but also in terms of enough workforce that are living near these places that you can actually employ. Because as I told you, each facility, for example, like ours, it's 200 people plus. So it's a lot of workforce. And third, least but not last, you need to have the adequate sink site where you're going to be applying the biochar. Because as I explained priorly, it's not enough to generate a credit, just the fact of generating the biochar, but you need to prove beyond any level of doubt that the biochar is going to be safely stored at a place where it's not going to have any, or it's not going to be burned for the next hundreds to thousands of years, which is the requirement of the methodology. You can do it in agriculture, you can do it in concrete and many other things right now, but not every single place has those three factors. If you, for example, are doing, I don't know, you're recollecting branches in the middle of the California forest, so to help with the forest fires and those type of things, but you have not any industrial capacity in there, then it doesn't make that easy, you know. Or if you don't have anywhere to apply it, such biochar, then it's going to be complicated. So not every place has this type of solution. What we have found is that these factors tend to be more easy to find in the global south. And also one important factor to consider is that normally in countries like in the US or Europe or any basically country that you have a cold weather, a lot of the waste, like in terms of our wood waste, basically gets transformed into pellets for heating in the winter. So therefore, you don't have such a type of biomass available.
Right. In the United States, a lot of those timber wastes, turn into biomass pellets that get used for electricity. So there isn't sort of the same ready waste stream as maybe in Bolivia or other places. That makes sense.
Correct.
Maybe just shifting a little bit. I know that Exomad is also potentially doing other things like, hey, you've got, timber operations, and what Earthshot largely focuses on isn't just, hey, carbon removal. It's also how do we restore and protect nature at scale, biodiverse ecosystems, forests. I'm just curious what your strategy and what your thinking is. Like, how do you think about, as a forestry company, biodiversity and native ecosystems, and just when you're working on a landscape level?
Yeah. So first of all, we try to be as Exomad a circular type of company. And biochar or our Exomad Green division was basically the last part to be a completely circular company, whereas we can use products that came from the forest or from the sustainable forestry sector, and we use them to deliver, all sorts of finished products from guitars to flooring and so on. And all the waste generated, it goes back into such soil, to restore degraded lands, to improve or to help fight against deforestation, and so on and so forth. And in terms of our own forest management, we have around 350,000 hectares of forest concessions that we manage as Exomat. And those concessions, we try to be or to hold them at the most high levels of forest conservation, nature conservation, and so on and so forth. We have a FSC certification for Exomat for all our facilities, and we try to have the best teams take care of our operations so that we can be truly a completely circular type of company, basically.
Yeah. Maybe. So I know that Bolivia recently had presidential elections, and I was just sort of reading through the sort of new president's views on carbon markets, and some of the goals that Bolivia has set out, because Bolivia potentially could be the recipient of international transfers for forest-based carbon payments that are pretty significant around conservation or reforestation, or strategies like biochar. I just wondered if you want to speak for a couple minutes on, hey, what is the state of the Bolivian regulatory landscape in terms of carbon or forests, and then also maybe what you could imagine over the coming years, and the direction that it could go, maybe as a model for other Latin American countries with the same, uh, the same perspective.
Sure, of course. So I actually had the opportunity to talk to the right now President-elect Rodrigo Paz on a couple of times, especially about carbon markets. And he has a very correct way of interpreting carbon markets and the use of carbon markets to actually help protect our forests, as well as to generate resources from it, because in like I was saying, in all of our countries where there's a lot of indigenous communities that live on such territories, there needs to be a generation of wealth, if you want to put it on that way, from the forest to have an incentive to actually protect those forests. If if there's not that incentive, there will always be a big risk of harm coming to the forest. Bolivia has about 51 million hectares of forest. It's one of the countries that has the most of its territory here in South America covered, about half of the territory with forest. And as I was saying priorly, I think that the president-elect right now has a correct view of developing the carbon market to a high point of trust with the international community, of sending the clear messages that Bolivia wants to participate on the market, but not only wants to participate, but that it wants to be a proactive member of regulations, of sending the correct messages to attract investments, to attract development of all the carbon market, whether if it's protection of forests for forest, sustainable forestry management, changing of electricity from fossil to renewables, and all the way to technology-based carbon credit generation, like projects like what we're doing. So I think that Bolivia, it's going to be in the news very frequently because the government is taking this as one of their pillars to actually take Bolivia and send the correct message to all the world.
Yeah. I just want to echo that. I think there's a very special opportunity also with basically smaller countries where, you know, a new president, there's maybe more sort of like whatever. In the United States, having consensus carbon policy across 50 different states, very, very, very challenging. Like that we're not going to see that anytime soon. But potentially in Bolivia or other particularly smaller Latin American countries, there's a huge opportunity, in my view, to one have a clear domestic policy of like, hey, how do you onboard landowners? What are the rules of the game in terms of doing conservation, reforestation strategies like biochar, and then being able to send a clear signal to you know, Corsia or the Singapore market or other sort of international compliance markets to have a basically have a dedicated demand signal. Probably the most common criticism we get of the carbon market broadly is like, hey, there's not regulatory certainty. And so corporations don't have incentive to go engage with it. And I think that there's actually an opportunity for Bolivia to take a level of leadership in this space to say, hey, we can provide regulatory certainty. And by being one of the first countries to really do that, being like, hey, here's the pathway to getting letters of authorization or, you know, other sort of like national level permits for these projects, and then having like a clear and efficient mechanism, like, hey, we don't want to just do this with Exomad. We want to enable, you know, 10,000 landowners to be able to participate in this, you know, in these set of policies. It would be one of the first examples of implementing basically a coherent domestic market along with a, you know, I would say this year, strengthening compliance market where there's actually some clear demand signals in these, you know, cross country transactions. So I'm excited for that as an opportunity. Yeah, so I just wanted to echo your thoughts on that.
No, excellent. And I think it's also, as you mentioned, an opportunity, but also it's going to be a shared responsibility because it doesn't only depend on one person. It depends on all of us which are involved in the carbon market to actually guide the 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 current government in that right direction. The government has to focus in so many different things. At some point. So it's up to us that are in this type of market to actually help in what we can, to try to show them the correct pathway. But as you clearly mentioned, it's a big opportunity. The president has shown a tremendous interest in developing this, and has frequently mentioned that it's one of the pillars of the country. So yes, I do
Yeah.
think that there's going to.
And I even think, like, I'm just using some other countries as an example, like, Ghana or basically places that have said, hey, we will be friendly towards international transactions of carbon credits, and we will make our policies such that we can actually have them, carbon credits exported to Singapore and bought by PetroChina or whatever, like where there's sort of like a clear linkage to international compliance markets. And that's without even having done it yet, or like, and it's more just like these initial signals. So like maybe just reiterating this opportunity, it doesn't take a lot to become a leader in this space. Like it's not like there are other countries that are like 10 steps ahead. There are countries that are maybe like one step ahead. And so, but you can see even like whatever, uh individual African countries that or other Latin American countries, Peru, Paraguay, that have sort of been like, oh yes, we're open to this, process. That then suddenly we get like at Earthshot, we get a wave of demand from corporations and investors saying, hey, can bring us projects from those countries. We want to engage. And that's without even having like, you know, fully formed policies yet. And so it's like investors, corporations, project developers, they're just like waiting with so much anticipation as soon as regulatory frameworks become clear. So I think that's maybe just one more element is like we see this on the demand side all the time. Like there's so much anticipation that's just being held back, be like, hey, we just want the government to say that they're not going to tax us at 50%, or we just want to know what the deal is before we go sink a bunch of money into one of these projects. But they're ready.
100%.
Um, maybe okay. So Exomad's leading this field. I think you signed a big offtake agreement with Microsoft. If someone else wants to go do this in another place, what's the process? Like, okay, I'm a whatever timber company in West Africa, and I want to go start a biochar facility. Like, how do they get started? There aren't that many experts around the world that I know have actually implemented this process before.
I think that there's several projects, but there are very few at a scale. And what I think that one of the key factors for this and to actually get or create the traction that we had as Exomad was to take a risk and do it, at a industrial type of a scale that makes sense. We have our what we say always in Exomad is that we deliver high integrity carbon credits at a scale, because in the technology-based CDR market, there's not too many other companies that do at scale. You can do 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 tons per year. We're actually this year, we just finished building a capacity to over 280,000 tons. So it's tremendously significant. As you said, we were the first company in the 4 biochar carbon credits to sign the largest offtake agreement with Microsoft, which is for 1.24 million tons. And it was not an easy path. It's a very complex path where you have to prove beyond any level of doubt that, first of all, you're going to be actually able to deliver. You have to put guarantees. You have to do different things, not only for Microsoft, but for any type of big corporation that's going to be buying from you. And to be able to do it, first of all, I would say, just think about the 3-step portion of which I said priorly, to have the biomass, to have the industrial capacity, and to have where you can apply the biochar. But moreover than that, there's always going to be a risk factor. And, if you think that you can do it, you just have to jump into and do it. If you overthink over these type of projects and you don't trust in the market, you're just never going to do it. So I think that level of risk that we took at a certain point in time when there were no other companies doing this at large scales, it was partially the success that we had. And also, I think that the opportunities is still out there. The level of demand that there is on the for CDR markets, it's it's not even fulfilled at a 2 or 3%. So there's a lot of demand right now, but there's very few companies actually delivering. So yes, for me, my advice would be as an expert on the field, if you know that you can do it, just do it. Don't overthink things. The market, you just have to do it.
That's great. Um, Maybe just to wrap up, you know, if you had a wish or, wave your magic wand, for Bolivia, for forests, for carbon markets, for the biochar market, for Exomad, like what are some things that you would really like to see over the coming few years to move this journey along?
Well, I think that what we were talking about, first of all, we need more players on the market. I have seen throughout these years that the level of buyers coming in is higher than the level of producers coming into the market. So I'm worried, that if we are not big enough, it's not gonna be a market that gets fulfilled, and it can be shifted or done into something else. So I think that my first wish would be to have 10,000 different exomads with all sorts of technologies, with all sorts of uh, uh, projects. So first of all, that's the first part. Secondly, in terms of a policy, I think that it's important for the countries that are taking, huge steps onto becoming or to having their net zero goals or corporate goals as well, with companies to be actually achieving. I see a lot of demand growing towards 2030, towards 2040. So I think that it's very important to continue on that path in which, as a country, but also as a corporation, you have a responsibility with environment to continue developing this type of market. And last but not least, for Bolivia, I would wish that Bolivia becomes a pioneer and a leader in like what we previously discussed, uh, regulatory and launching the correct uh, messages to the world to make Bolivia a hub for the carbon market. And I think that it's truly going to happen. And we hope that as Exomad, we can contribute actively on developing this market, not only for us, but for the whole benefit of Bolivia and the world as well.
That's beautiful. Thank you for the time, Diego. Really appreciate the work you're doing, and I also really hope 10,000 more exomads, and that is a solution for climate action at scale, and also just something that I don't think we've really seen other you know carbon removal technologies other than forests, basically. But it's not like enhanced rock weathering or direct air capture or some of these other technologies have achieved anything near what biochar has, which also has sort of like an integrated, it's not outside of nature. It's actually saying, hey, we have these waste streams and we can actually make the soil better. We can increase water retention. We can increase biodiversity, even in this sort of logging operation. And I think that's a really wise way of approaching carbon removal. It's not just about removing CO2 from the atmosphere. It's actually about creating this integrated system that gives back to the soil in particular. So thank you for this time. Really appreciate it. And best of luck at Exomad.
Thank you very much for your time, Troy, and it was a pleasure being with you and Ershad here. Thank you. Bye-bye.